Hi, Martha.
Hey, Bill, how you doing?
Okay. We first met in the early 90s,
Early mid-90s, yeah.
early mid-90s, before you were a composer, as far as any of us knew. We knew you as a singer. So, how did you become a composer?
Well, there's a couple steps to that. When I lived in Boston and came to Western Wind workshops, as it turns out, I did run a church choir, and occasionally there was not a good arrangement of something I wanted to do in the library, so I would just make an arrangement. There was that one afternoon when I arranged Steal Away, and it went on to, it had legs. A few different people have done it. I didn't think of myself as a composer at that time. It was not what I was brought up to be. That was not something that girls did, according to my mom. When I came to New York, I met the organist Stephen Tharp at my church job at St. Bartholomew's on Park Avenue. And we were having a beer one night, and I started to drum out some Bulgarian dance rhythms, specifically Sandansko Oro, which goes, which is da 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 extra 22/16. And Stephen said, "That's a great rhythm. Can you write me an organ piece based on that?" And I said, "Stephen, I am a soprano, not a composer. Have another beer and shut up." So we had another beer, and then he came back to it and he said, "So, about that organ piece that you're going to write for me." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Really." So I wrote him an organ piece, and more movements developed. It became a 4-movement organ symphony called Slingshot Chivalry for organ, 2 percussionists, and women's choir singing in the Bulgarian style. And that's how I became a composer. But it's worth noting that this would not have happened if it were not for the Western Wind, and the fact that when I brought my arrangements of spirituals to workshops, they said, "These are really good. You should do more with them. Maybe you should move to New York and pursue musical stuff in New York." And lo and behold, here we are. So that is, in short, how I became a composer. I wrote a lot of things and got to the limits of what I could teach myself. And so about 10 years ago, I applied to grad school, and I'm currently working on my doctorate at Rutgers in music composition.
Fantastic. Now, the group has changed since you actually conceived the piece. So
Yeah,
several new members.
The Western Wind does have several new members. What's interesting to me is that every single person in this group I have worked with in some capacity outside of the Western Wind. Linda, the gorgeous soprano, Linda Lee Jones, is the only person who I think I first encountered in the Western Wind, but we have done early music gigs together. I am a huge fan of her voice and her musicality. Now, Elizabeth Van Oath, I know from doing opera chorus stuff up at Bard, and she is just extraordinary. She has this amazing presence, and she always knows her mark, knows where to go to on stage, is thoroughly reliable. She has a gorgeous voice. She's the queen of the high C's. She puts on her makeup and does like the hair stuff better and more efficiently than anybody else I know. And this I know because we were always next to each other in the alphabet, so we always sat next to each other at our changing stations. She's just absolutely stunning in everything she does. And she and Linda sound fabulous together. Eric Brenner, I guess I first met him doing stuff for Toby Twining, who is this astounding composer of microtonal music based on Ben Johnston's chroma of septimal sevenths extended just intonation technique. If you don't know what that is, that's fine. But Eric is able to do astounding things and sings extraordinarily high as not just a countertenor, but a sopranist in some situations. So we go back to doing some very, very strange music together, and it's a lot of fun. Todd, who's actually videotaping this interview, I know is, yeah, up and down it goes. Todd, I know as somebody who's incredibly committed to the physicality of words and text. I first met him, though, when I moved to New York and occasionally sang evensong at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. And the first time I met him, well, first of all, St. John's, they have purple choir robes. And I was like, whoa, in New York, they have colored choir robes for Episcopal Church things. Todd showed up for that first evensong that I sang with him wearing this sort of chartreuse green outfit. And I was like, who is this man? He's astounding, and he knows how to do amazing things with color. He has maintained that standard ever since. And that was a couple decades ago when we were both 12. So Todd does amazing things physically with text and physically with clothes. Basically, with Todd, it's all about being vivid. And that is something that I appreciate. It's pretty amazing. Let's see. Dave Vanderwall, I know, we actually met through mutual friends singing the funeral of a friend's father. So my first memory of him is driving down to southern New Jersey for a rather somber occasion, but with beautiful musicians doing something that was good for the hearts of the people involved. And as you'll hear, he still sings gorgeously and can move you, as he does in the solo that he does on the piece that I wrote. Steve Reislack is the newest member of the group. And he's another person that I guess I first met doing the opera chorus stuff, but that was like many years ago. It was over 10 years ago. And Steve's very much in demand because he can sing lower than most people. Having a really true basso profundo sound is something strangely rare, and he's got it. And when I came to rehearsal the other night to listen to this group sing, it was the first time I'd heard this particular combination of voices, and they all just sort of went zhunk and locked into this astounding sound. And they were all so willing to explore whatever I asked them to do and to go level after level deeper into the music and to the way it works. It was really just extraordinary to work with them. Each one is different. Each voice is different. Each personality is very different. But I think these people are all my friends and my colleagues. And it's a huge gift that they give to me to work on my music with this level of detail and attention. I think it's also a gift to the community of the Western Wind because they model in microcosm what it is to be a community and to be at the heart of a larger community. So I hope you can hear this. I mean, I was at rehearsal and I got all sniffy and cried a few times because it was so gorgeous.
Thank you. Martha, what's the genesis of certain dragons?
I'm not sure when I came up with the idea of writing pieces about dragons. It predates Bill asking me to write a piece for the Western Wind. I, like many composers who like to write for voice, have sort of a running file of texts I might like to set. And I started collecting dragon texts sometime in the early 2000s, I think. So I have a huge list of them. You know, it's not just the 5 that I set here, but there's stuff by Milton and, you know, stuff going way, way back. But dragons fascinate me. There are many different kinds of dragons depending on which kind of fantasy literature you read, or perhaps you're into ancient Chinese literature where dragons feature prominently. But I just have many, many dragon texts, and these are the 5 I happen to set now.
Mm-hmm. The one text that really, I say, grabbed me so immediately was the one that you wrote.
I did sneak a poem of my own into there called Dragon of My Heart. It's a little bit cryptic, and it basically is a sort of epistle to a dragon that I might carry inside myself. It doesn't refer to a particular situation in my life, but it sort of sounds like I'm writing an epistle to the dragon that is maybe a crush I had that was not appropriate, or perhaps a desire to do something that was not appropriate. You know, sort of, we all get little obsessions with things that are not healthy for us. So this is an epistle to a potential obsession, saying, you know, dragon of my heart, I really thought I locked you away and didn't have to deal with you anymore, but you snuck out. Worms have their ways, is the line in which I express that. And there you are again. So come take me, you know, with your flame, with your power, you know, just take me. We keep turning back to our obsessions. We keep turning back to the things that are unhealthy, alcoholic personality kind of things, or romantic obsessions, like I said. This is not about a specific one, but the dragon of my heart is the thing that keeps coming back and gnawing on us. So sometimes we surrender to it, sometimes we shut it away. But I think it's important to acknowledge that sometimes these things have power over us. The poetry is hopefully a little bit more cryptic and a little bit more lovely than that. Bill says he likes the music, so I hope that the music also expresses how these desires can be very compelling and can just draw us in.
Bill loves the music. Then talk a bit about the Sassoon, the second one.
Yeah, Siegfried Sassoon was a poet of the First World War. I don't know how much he's taught in schools anymore, but he and Wilfred Owen are the two biggies. And they have a lot of harrowing things to say about war. I don't know that war is ever clean, but it was much less clean in World War I, and the carnage was extraordinary. So Sassoon wrote a poem about the dragon swoops down from the skies and sets the roofs of the cities on fire. He longs to burn down all the churches and hurt the people. And then the second half of the poem talks about the souls of the dead. Now, World War I, as you may remember, was about a century ago. We haven't had something that is technically called a world war in a long time. But we do have things going on today that have the potential to be just as destructive. So, not to get political, but I'm going to get political and say climate change goes beyond the political, right? And if you saw the pictures of the California wildfires turning all the skies of California orange last year, you know that we still have the same kind of dragon that Sassoon described. We have that extraordinary power to destroy. And how do we conquer that? 100 years ago, it was through war. It was through countries getting together and putting down the power that wanted to destroy things. The destructive powers we have now are somewhat larger. Global warming and climate change, that's a dragon. That's a huge dragon that we need to gather together to fight. Same thing with stuff like global pandemics. This is huge. And it takes human beings loving each other and caring enough to figure out new and innovative ways to work together to conquer that kind of dragon. Sassoon's poetry doesn't talk so much about how to conquer the dragon. I don't know that he saw an end to the dragon's power at that point. But he talks about the mourning for the souls that have been, he says, left unsung. But I'm thinking of the bodies of the dead in World War I and how they remained unburied. And there's some of that in our life now. We need to figure out how to acknowledge the dragon, how to mourn our losses, but furthermore, how to move forward after that and try to create a better world, even in the face of that kind of dragon power.
Speaking of the pandemic actually forced us to postpone the world premiere of this wonderful piece in March of 2020. We were about to do it, and then we had to shut down, like everyone else. So now we're hopefully trying to slay the dragon at least a little bit and have come back to do the piece.
I think the ability to come back and to do the piece again is an important part of dragon slaying. I was deprived of community singing in groups professionally or avocationally for whatever, a year and a half of the pandemic. And it was extremely depressing. Many of us who sing all the time felt a very important part of ourselves ripped away and suppressed. And it's only just within the past month or so that my habitual choral activities, like my singing in church and singing with other new music groups. Little shout out to C4, the Choral Composer Conductor Collective, who did our first live thing last week. And afterwards we were all like, it was like being drunk. We were just giddy afterwards. And I was giddy on Tuesday when I came to the Western Wind rehearsal to hear these guys, because it had been so long since I had heard acoustic voices blending together and just like pulling melodies and harmonies as if out of thin air. It was something that I had forgotten the specialness of. And I fully intend not to take the opportunity to do choral music as a composer, as a performer, as an audience member for granted ever again.
Let's talk about the Yeats, the third one. Is that the third one?
The which?
William Butler Yeats.
Oh, the Yeats. Yes. Yes. It's a very, very short poem. And it basically asks, okay, so you've got fantasy literature poems of dragons in the past. You've got pre-Raphaelite paintings of gorgeous nymphs languishing in the water, and there's beauty and there's heroes and there's dragons to be slain. We all know, says Yeats, that these things aren't really walking the earth right now. So what is the good of having stories of dragons, poetry of dragons, images of dragons? What does that even do? And the answer he says in this poem is, well, it brings to mind the desire to go back to that time when the challenges were bigger, when there were dragons to slay, when you could rise to the occasion and become a hero. So in the age in which we live, all that literature, all that art, all that music serves to encourage you to live larger, to rise to these huge challenges, even if they're not the same. We don't live in the Lord of the Rings. I know sometimes we would like to, but we don't. We have other challenges, as I mentioned before. Maybe all that art and literature and music can be something that prompts you to rise to the challenge and to be able to make a difference.
Let's talk about the first piece.
The poetry in the first piece, well, actually, when I first wrote that, when the commission first came to be, Bill was actually still singing countertenor in the group. So the tune...
Which I did for 51 years.
51 years. I have not done anything for 51 years, outside of just simply living, But the piece was actually conceived with Bill's voice in mind. Eric has stepped into the Western Wind countertenor role. It actually got transposed up because Eric was like, it's too low for me. It's like, okay, Eric, you can sing all the high G's and things you want. It's fine. The poetry's by John Keats, and it's a little bit simpler. I assume it's some sort of heroine dream, but it's sort of like, here's my vision. I am going down to the depths of, the afterlife, the lower world, the world of Hades and stuff. And I'm in search of my lover. And there's lots of imagery of sort of storm-tossed, strange things in the sort of moody heroine dream that Keats describes. I think the poetry is fairly simple. It's just that it's in sort of early 19th century complicated, twisty language. So there's some complicated, twisty melodies and whole tone harmonies to support the weirdness.
And to make it challenging.
Well, I don't write to be challenging. I like to write good tunes, and then I like to sometimes do harmonies in particular that are going to be surprising, because I don't want everything to be the proverbial 1-4-5-1. Not everything is the blues.
Speaking of surprising, the last movement is surprising that you decided to set a spiritual.
The spiritual has some text about dragons in it. The unifying theme is, of course, dragons. Sometime before the American Civil War, an anonymous slave author did pen a text called In That Great Gettin' Up Morning, which basically is a description of the Lord says to Gabriel, blow your trumpet and tell the people about the end times. It is time to gather. And then there's some very vivid descriptions of what the end of the world will be like. The moon is bloody and there's plague sort of things. And then the dragon that has been bound will be released. Whatever that means. And it's the end of the world. And there are some descriptions in there. And these descriptions of end times appealed to me. But, when I first collected that text, as I said, when I was collecting dragon texts, originally it was the early 2000s. And I did not know how apocalyptic and sort of Mad Max the world was going to get in the next decade. The interesting problem with that text is it is a text that there is an actual traditional spiritual that is set to that text. I did not do an arrangement of that spiritual because this is a commission for original music. The trick is, can you use a text like that and turn it into music that doesn't sound like a spiritual? If that was my goal, I actually failed. The piece has a rather catchy tune that does sound like it could be a spiritual. Although the middle section where we start describing the end of the world does not sound like a spiritual. It sounds more like Martha music. In 2020, we had the pandemic, but we also had America saying, we have had enough with what we've been doing to our Black Americans. BLM came to the forefront in a big way. There were many protests, there were many marches. It became apparent at the same time that if you're a white person and you are appropriating art that is made by Black people, you are stealing and you are doing something that is problematic in a lot of ways. Older friends of mine who are Black are like, please take the texts, take the music, set them and spread them. We want our voices amplified. But among the younger generation, there's a bit less tolerance for that. And I will say that if I were doing this commission now in 2021 instead of 2019, I might have made some different choices for what the fifth movement of this would be. There has been a tendency in choral music in America to do Black spirituals and be like, this music is fast, it is upbeat, it has a certain kind of energy. We would like to put it at the end of a set or at the end of a concert because it leaves people leaving the theater humming. That's not what I want to do with this. I think it's worth noting the music I wrote seems rather upbeat, major key, but it is describing the end of the world. And we've come closer to the end of the world in the past couple of years than I think most of us ever remember coming before. I'm not old enough to remember the early days of the Cold War, Cuban Missile Crisis. I've read about it, read what Ned Rorem thought of it. He thought the world was coming to an end, but that was before I was born. For most of us, things have been a bit apocalyptical. So what about the tension between a text written by slaves about the end of the world, after which perhaps things will be happier, and the music of American spirituals, which tends not to be discordant, it tends to be powerful, it tends to be rich, it tends to have simple harmonies, because the goal is to get people singing about better times beyond the horrific times in which people find themselves. It's a complicated balance. Positive music designed to get people through the worst imaginable times. If I've succeeded at all with this fifth movement, it's because the positive music suggests pushing through and beyond to something that's better.
This is fabulous. You're such a great talker.